Love doesn't die. It withdraws, silently, without warning. Without reason your mind can grasp. You think they changed. That one day they just woke up and stopped caring. But Jung would offer you a far more terrifying truth. They didn't change. They revealed. When someone stops loving you, it's not always because something went wrong. It's because something false couldn't be sustained. What you called love may have only been a performance, an unconscious agreement between two personas, not two souls. A projection, not a bond. You were not loved. Your image was. And when that image no longer served their need for comfort, validation, or illusion, they let it go, quietly, almost surgically. Jung believed the unconscious drives human behavior far more than we admit. We fall in love with the reflection of our own suppressed needs, with what completes our ego story. But the unconscious doesn't care about your fantasies. It waits. It watches. And when the persona begins to crack, the shadow leaks through. Love turns cold not because it fades, but because reality invades. The masks begin to itch. The projection flickers. The psychological contract, "You be who I need, and I'll give you affection," is breached. So they withdraw. Not out of cruelty, but because something in them woke up, and it saw you, not the fantasy, but the truth. And maybe it couldn't love that truth. Or maybe it never tried. You weren't betrayed. You were unmasked. And now the pain you feel is not just heartbreak. It's existential collapse. Because if that love wasn't real, what part of you was ever truly seen? This is the first wound, but it's only the beginning. There is a moment you don't forget. Not because it was loud, but because it was empty. A look that used to hold warmth now scans through you like glass. A silence that doesn't come from peace, but from absence. What changed? Jung would say. The persona failed. The mask you wore, the one designed to be pleasing, safe, desirable, no longer held. Their fantasy. And when the persona crumbles, the illusion collapses with it. Most relationships are not between two people, but between two masks. You think you were loved for your soul, your heart, your vulnerability. But were you? Or were you loved because you fit into their unconscious script? The perfect partner, the rescuer, the nurturer, the rebel, the savior. The psyche is not seeking truth. It's seeking equilibrium, safety, completion. And when your role no longer fits the narrative they're unconsciously clinging to, the coldness begins. That coldness isn't hatred. It's detachment from the illusion they no longer need. You didn't fail them. You outlived your psychological function. Perhaps the cruelest part? They don't even know why they've changed. The conscious mind creates excuses. I'm just not feeling it anymore. We've grown apart. But beneath those words is a primal shift in the psyche, a movement of unconscious forces that neither of you can see. But both of you feel Jung warned. When we identify with our persona, we confuse adaptation with authenticity. And when someone withdraws from us, we feel as though we're dying, because a false self is dying. But maybe that death is necessary. Maybe that coldness is the beginning of something deeper than love, awakening, because when the mask is rejected, only the real self remains, and that self has never truly been seen. Are you ready to face it? You were trained to be lovable, not to be real. Since childhood, your survival depended on one thing: approval, not truth, not authenticity. Approval. So you became a mirror, a shapeshifter. You watched their reactions, adjusted your tone, suppressed your needs. You learned when to smile, when to disappear, when to be soft enough not to provoke. This was not love. It was self-erasure in exchange for safety. Jung called this the formation of the persona, the mask you wear to be accepted by society. But here's the catch. Every mask hides something. Behind the persona is the shadow, the parts of you that were deemed unacceptable, unworthy, or inconvenient. The anger, the hunger, the need to be seen as you are, not as you perform. And when someone loves your persona, they are unknowingly loving your survival strategy, not your essence. That's why it hurts so deeply when love turns cold. It confirms your worst fear. The real me was never part of the deal. You believed that if you played your role perfectly, they would stay. But the role was never you. It was a psychological decoy, and eventually they see through it. But here's the twist. They too are wearing masks, and when your persona stops validating theirs, a quiet war begins. Not with shouting or betrayal, but with emotional withdrawal. With indifference, this isn't a breakup. It's a collision of unconscious forces, two shadows refusing to integrate, two personas unraveling at the seams. The love you thought was sacred was a fragile agreement. I'll reflect what you want if you reflect what I need. But what happens when that reflection darkens? They leave. Or worse, they stay but grow cold. Not because they hate you, but because loving you required a lie they can no longer maintain. And now you're left with a question you've spent your life avoiding. Who am I? When I stop being who they wanted me to be? They didn't fall out of love, they fell out of projection. You were never just you were their story, their savior, their fantasy. And the moment you stopped playing the role, the enchantment broke. Not because you changed, but because they finally saw you, and what they saw didn't match the script they were clinging to. We think of love as connection, but more often, it's confusion, a confusion between who someone is and what we need them to be. Jung warned, falling in love is a form of unconscious possession. We are seized, not by the person, but by the archetype they activate, the lover, the healer, the ideal. We don't see them. We see through them. And when reality pierces the veil, when the flaws surface, when the shadow leaks through, we recoil. It's not betrayal. It's disillusionment. They pulled away not because they stopped caring, but because the mask you wore could no longer sustain their psychological dream. And in truth, you were doing the same to them. Because love, unexamined, becomes a dance of projections. Two wounded children in adult bodies, trying to complete stories that began long before the relationship ever did. That's why it ends without warning. Because the warning signs were buried, not in behavior, but in expectation. In the unconscious contracts neither of you realized you signed. I'll keep being who you need, as long as you keep pretending I'm enough. But the unconscious doesn't tolerate lies forever. It erupts. It sabotages. And when it does, love turns cold. Not out of malice, but as a psychic correction, a mirror shattering, a story collapsing. You weren't abandoned. You were liberated from a role that was never yours to carry. But now comes the harder task, facing the parts of you that were willing to disappear, just to be loved. There's a voice inside you, faint, trembling, and long neglected. It asks quietly, if I stop performing, will anyone stay? This is not fear. It's trauma masquerading as logic. Because the first time you showed your true self, your rage, your grief, your chaos, someone flinched, someone punished you, or worse, someone left. So you learned to split. You buried your fire under charm. You replaced truth with usefulness. You became lovable by becoming less. And now, decades later, that wound returns, disguised as a breakup. But Jung would argue, this is not the death of a relationship. It's the confrontation with your original wound. The one that taught you love must be earned. That safety only exists when you disappear behind a pleasing mask. That intimacy means suppressing your wildness to preserve connection. But here's the cruel paradox. The more you disappear, the more invisible you become. And the more invisible you become, the more likely they are to turn cold, not because they're cruel, but because your absence becomes unbearable. No one can love a ghost, and you made yourself into one, to survive. The coldness you feel now is not just theirs, it's yours. It's the accumulated silence of every time you said, I'm fine, when you weren't. It's the buried scream of every need you swallowed. It's the freezing echo of all the truths you hid just to be held. Jung believed the shadow must be integrated, not exiled, and right now, your shadow is screaming for recognition, not to be healed, to be seen. Because love can't warm what you refuse to reveal, and the longer you wear the mask, the colder it gets, inside and out. So the question isn't why they turned cold. Question is, when did you? You think you're mourning them, but what if you're mourning you? Not the one who smiles for others, not the version shaped by acceptance and reward, but the forgotten self, buried beneath decades of adaptation. Jung warned us, the self is not what the world sees, but what we hide to survive it. And most of us are strangers to that self. We build identities like fortresses made of roles, habits, expectations, the good partner, the loyal lover, the one who never complains. But every role we accept is a silence we swallow, and eventually, the weight of those silences turns to ice. When they grew distant, when the warmth vanished, you assumed it was about them. But what if their absence only revealed your own? You abandoned yourself long before they did. You chose peace over truth, harmony over honesty, presence over power. And now you wonder why it hurts so deeply. Because their departure shattered the illusion you worked so hard to maintain. That if you were enough, quiet enough, kind enough, patient enough, they would stay. But Jung reminds us, the unconscious doesn't bargain. It demands wholeness. It drags the hidden parts of you into the light, not gently but through crisis, loss, rupture. You're not broken because they left. You're awakening because the role you played finally collapsed, and beneath that role is a question you've avoided your whole life. Who are you when no one is watching? This isn't just heartbreak. It's a psychic crossroads, a chance to retrieve the parts of you exiled for love that was never real. And now that the mask is shattered, the cold is not a punishment. It's an invitation to step into the fire of your own truth. Are you willing to enter it? There is no betrayal more painful than self-betrayal. You search for answers in their silence. You dissect their distance looking for clues. But the truth isn't in them. It's in the moment you chose their comfort over your own truth. That's when the coldness began. Not in their eyes, but in your soul. The moment you smiled when you wanted to scream. The moment you stayed quiet when your heart begged to speak. The moment you ignored your instincts. Because love told you to. Jung taught that repression is not harmless. What you bury doesn't die. It grows claws in the dark, and it turns inward. You didn't lose their love. You lost your own reflection. Piece by piece, you sacrificed your authenticity on the altar of connection, until you no longer recognized the person in the mirror. And now that they've turned cold, the mirror is cracking. Because what hurts isn't just that they left. It's that you gave everything. And it still wasn't enough. But enough for what? To be chosen, to be safe, to prove you're worthy? That's not love. That's desperation dressed as devotion. You were not seeking love. You were seeking permission to exist. But Jung would say, no one can grant you that. The self must claim itself. Through confrontation, not compliance. Through rage, not repression. Through truth, not approval. The cold you feel now is sacred. It's the death of the false self, the unraveling of a mask that never fit. You can chase warmth again. Another mask, another fantasy. Or you can step into the unknown, alone, naked, real, because only there, in the silence beyond performance, can true love begin. But first, something must die. Are you ready to bury the lie? You've spent your life trying to be understood, but only in ways that wouldn't threaten anyone. Polished vulnerability, controlled chaos, the kind of honesty that earns applause, not rejection. But Jung didn't speak of tidy healing. He spoke of integration. And integration is messy, brutal, unapologetic. The shadow doesn't want to be pitied. It wants to be known. It wants to scream, to rage, to finally tell the truth you were never allowed to say. Because behind the heartbreak, Beneath the silence lies a truth you've buried your entire life. You are not who you pretend to be, and neither were they. What turned cold wasn't love. It was the performance. Two actors, both exhausted, both trapped in a play they never auditioned for. They fell out of character. You fell out of illusion, and now you're left with the raw material of who you truly are. No script, no applause, no costume. Scary? Yes, but also real. Jung believed the psyche demands balance. The parts of you denied expression will claw their way back into the light. If not through dreams and insight, then through breakdown and loss. That's what this is. Not punishment. Not, failure. But psychic compensation. Your soul correcting the lie you called love. You want to feel close to someone again, but closeness without self-honesty is possession. Not intimacy. It's fusion, not union. It's dependency in disguise. The next time you feel coldness from another, ask yourself, what part of me have I frozen first? Because every time you abandon your truth for connection, you invite a future where that connection must die for the truth to finally live. And maybe that's what's happening now, a death, but also the beginning of something uncorrupted. Can you let it burn? There's a terrifying freedom in rejection. At first it feels like destruction. Your worth disintegrates. Your identity trembles. The silence they leave behind is not empty. It echoes with every suppressed scream you swallowed just to stay loved. But Jung saw this differently. He believed that crisis was not the end. It was the threshold. The crumbling of the persona is not death, it's initiation. You see, most people live their entire lives without ever meeting themselves. They live as echoes, reflections of what others desire, demand, expect, and only when they are shattered, by loss, by abandonment, by sudden coldness, do they finally look inward, not to fix, to see. What you feel now is not just grief. It's withdrawal from the drug of illusion. You've been high on being needed, on being wanted as long as you behaved. But love without truth is dependency, and dependency will always rot into resentment. Theirs, yours both. When they left or turned cold or stopped responding, they didn't destroy you. They exposed you to yourself. Now you face the task most avoid their entire lives, to love yourself without performance, to stand in the wreckage of your old identity, trembling, furious, raw, and say, this is me. This has always been me. And I will no longer exile my soul to be embraced. Jung called this process individuation. It is the slow, painful alchemy of becoming whole, not perfect, whole. And wholeness doesn't come from being loved. It comes from reclaiming the parts of you that would rather be hated than ignored. So let their coldness stay cold. Let their silence remain sacred, because it gave birth to the only voice that truly matters now. Yours. Are you ready for the final step? This was never about them, not their silence, not their distance, not even their love. It was about the part of you that believed love required sacrifice. Not the poetic kind, but the kind that costs your soul. You see, coldness doesn't just arrive. It is invited. By the parts of you that whisper, if I'm pleasing enough, I'll be safe. If I'm soft enough, I'll be chosen. But Jung would say, the self does not bloom in safety. It emerges from confrontation, from rupture. From the moment you finally refuse to play dead in your own life, because that's what the persona asks of you, to die quietly so others can stay comfortable. But the shadow refuses. It remembers. It rages. And when love turns cold, it rises. This is not a tragedy. It is a return. A return to the voice you silenced, to the instincts you called too much, to the hunger you buried in exchange for affection that was never unconditional. You keep asking, why did they stop loving me? But a better question is, when did you stop loving yourself to keep their love alive? The answer is not in their departure. It's in every micro-abandonment you committed against yourself, every time you laughed at what hurt, every time you apologized for your truth, every time you called your boundaries drama. Now the performance is over, and what remains is terrifying. But it's also sacred, because it's you raw, unfiltered, undeniable. Jung didn't promise comfort, he promised wholeness. And wholeness means loving every part of you, even the ones they couldn't. So if love turned cold, let it freeze. Let it crack the false shell. Let it expose the fire beneath. You don't need another person to melt it. You need the courage to burn, because only in that fire do you meet the self no one else could see. And once you've met that, you will never settle for half love again. This is the end of illusion, and the beginning of your return. Welcome back.